The MVP voting in Major League Baseball has become an absolute joke, and this year's results are just another example.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we are now the number one sports podcast network. And Locked On Phillies is your number one place for daily Monday through Friday Philadelphia Phillies content. You might know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air over at 97.5 The Fanatic doing sports talk radio here in Philadelphia for over 6 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for the past 4 seasons. And this is now my 4th year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets you use across the app. Download the app today. Kyle Schwarber, MVP runner-up in the National League. Shohei Ohtani wins the award. Rightfully so. But there's something about the voting that I just cannot understand. And this is going to be a very similar episode to yesterday because I had the same type of gripes with the NL Cy Young voting. And we're going to look at a little bit later on in the episode, Trea Turner, who surprisingly to me came in 5th in National League MVP voting. I mean, I know he led the National League in batting average, but that's shocking to me, especially considering the time he missed at the end of the season and everything. We'll talk about whether or not we undervalue Trea Turner, much like in yesterday's episode, we discussed whether or not we undervalue Rob Thompson. And we'll wrap up with our off-the-poll question results on who the number one free agent you'd want the Phillies to re-sign. So players that were on the team this past year would be a very interesting case study as to where fans are at. But the MVP voting has become such a sham. I guess the year-end awards voting in general has been ridiculous in Major League Baseball. And this year's another example. You could take it to the Hall of Fame voting as well, because at the end of the day, the writers who are voting for these awards clearly are either voting with agenda or without proper knowledge of the players that they're deciding on. You might take this, because this is Locked On Phillies, a Phillies podcast, as a statement of Kyle Schwarber should have won the National League MVP over Shohei Ohtani. And that's not what I'm saying. Much like Paul Skeens with the National League Cy Young Award over Christopher Sanchez, Skeens was deserving, Ohtani's deserving. I mean, how could I sit here and try and tell you that Shohei Ohtani is not deserving of being the most valuable player of the National League? He pitches, he hits, he does both at an incredibly high level. My argument for Kyle Schwarber to win the award would be, look at the other players on Kyle Schwarber's team compared to him. Numbers-wise, he blew everybody else on his squad out of the water when it came to home run production, RBI production. If you take Kyle Schwarber off the Philadelphia Phillies, you could make a strong argument they would not have been a postseason team this past year. That's part of the reason I am so strongly in favor of them paying him whatever you need to bring him back. You take Shohei Ohtani off of the Los Angeles Dodgers, and they don't win the World Series, but do they make the playoffs? Of course they do. Look at the rest of that team. Look at some of the numbers of his teammates that were generally in the same neighborhood as Ohtani in certain categories. Now, I'm not saying there's a bunch of Ohtanis out there. I'm saying, like, well, he might have a teammate who's close to him in RBIs, and then a different teammate that's close to him in homers, and a different teammate that's close to him in average. There was no Philly that came anywhere close to Kyle Schwarber's home run or RBI total this year. Not even close. And that's why I thought he should be MVP, but it's more of a biased take there, and I'll admit that. My problem with the MVP voting is that Shohei Ohtani won National League MVP unanimously over a guy that had more home runs than him and more RBIs than him at the same position. I know Ohtani also pitches, but let's not pretend like he was out there making 30 starts this year. He had to work his way back up. He was only throwing like 4 or 5 innings at a time. He was rehabbing his way back into being a starting pitcher. So let's call them both DHs to find a group of 30 people who decided that none of them were going to vote for Kyle Schwarber as the National League MVP is unfathomable to me. Like, not a single one of you would go out on a limb and say it's not Shohei Ohtani. Say, I actually like Kyle Schwarber's case. Like, I'm not advocating for Schwarber to win the award, but I'm advocating for just one person out there to vote for him. There were more people who had Kyle Schwarber 5th in the National League MVP voting than had him 1st. And that is a flat out affront to the way these baseball awards are given out. If you think it's just me being biased about Kyle Schwarber, take a look at what happened in the American League. Because Aaron Judge won MVP over Cal Raleigh. Cal Raleigh, the switch hitting, platinum glove winning catcher of the Seattle Mariners, who hit 60 bombs this year and also led his team well above expectations. Whereas Aaron Judge, the leader of the New York Yankees, did not push his team further than expectations. In fact, they came up well short of what they probably wanted to do coming off of a year where they won the American League pennant. And somehow, Aaron Judge wins that award over Cal Raleigh. I don't feel like justice was served in the way these votes broke down. I think Cal Raleigh should have won American League MVP. And I think Kyle Schwarber should have at least gotten some votes for first place in the National League MVP running. And honestly, it's insulting to me as a fan of the game of baseball that it's so clear that folks voting for these awards vote based on agenda. And because it's a Philadelphia Phillies player, I now have the platform to talk more about it, being that this, again, is a Phillies podcast. If you watch Kyle Schwarber's season and when he hit those home runs and how he carried this team offensively and everything he did to put at times a struggling offense completely on his back, for him to not receive a single first place vote is embarrassing. And I don't know what the solution is, but here's what I would change. And we would see if this makes a difference to whether or not the MVP voting feels more legitimate, or Cy Young voting, or any voting that the media does, the Writers Association does. You got to make it a larger pool. You got to make it a bigger group of people. That's the only way that you can avoid having these individual biases change the award. In the American League, Aaron Judge got 17 first place votes and Cal Raleigh got 13 first place votes. So that means that if two guys flip the other way, you have a tie, and then it plays off based on second and third place voting, right? If two voters for Judge switched over to Cal Raleigh could be MVP. So you're telling me that after all of that season, there are two individuals that could swing that vote? Could you imagine that in I don't know. We always say every vote counts when it comes to politics. And I'm not going to just talk politics about you. This is not the place for that. This is a sports podcast and we keep it sports. But could you imagine if two people, their votes mattered than the rest of the country? That's just whoever they vote for wins. It's ridiculous that in a sport where MVPs carry so much weight to your overall legacy as a player, that it can be a handful of writers that don't like a guy for a certain reason or didn't watch a lot of Mariners baseball because they're not featured as much nationally, that say, well, Aaron Judge plays in New York, so he's the MVP. Or Shohei Ohtani just won the World Series. And I know it's a regular season award and the votes have already been in, but Shohei Ohtani is a pitcher and a hitter and he's won 3 already, so we're going to give him his 4th and not even consider Kyle Schwarber for a first place vote. You're doing a disservice to the game of baseball. And while I'm glad that Kyle Schwarber was a top 2 MVP finisher, and you know what we're going to do to start off next week once I have a weekend to cleanse me? We're going to go back at the Phillies award finalists, and we're going to give them their proper respect, because I feel like a lot of what I've been doing is complaining about the way the votes have come down, which I think is rightful to do, considering Skeen shouldn't have been unanimous. Shohei shouldn't have been unanimous, in my opinion. But you look at this and you say, with how important the legacy of a player's career is based on MVPs and Cy Youngs and these things that can define a player's career, to have a handful of people just erroneously changing at their will who wins the award and who doesn't, does not seem to be the best course of action. So I would widen the pool of people that get to vote on it, which then counters out the individual biases, and hopefully that gets things right. I don't think baseball is going to do it, so at this point, I'm kind of over it. But it doesn't feel legit. Not that the guys who won don't deserve to win, but that the way the process breaks down shows that there are inherent flaws with the current voting process for these awards. So Kyle Schwarber, congratulations on an incredible season. I didn't think he was going to win MVP. I did think he was going to get a vote, whatever the case may be. We know how special Schwarber was here in Philadelphia this past year. That's why he needs to be brought back. There's another guy who had a pretty special year, and it went really under the radar because the city feels a certain type of way about Trea Turner. But coming up next, we're going to talk about the 5th place finisher in the MVP voting in the National League. In a surprise, it's another Philly. First, let's talk about FanDuel, though, because they are the best place to bet on basketball. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel. They're the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game, or maybe you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who's going to score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Sixers play tonight. They've got the Pistons in Detroit. Little revenge match after losing to the Pistons last time these two teams matched up, but Cade Cunningham's been red hot for Detroit. It'll be an interesting game. They also have bets on football, hockey, college football, college basketball, all kinds of sports on FanDuel you can find. They're the absolute best. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's talk a little Trea Turner. This is very much how yesterday's episode went. I complained about Christopher Sanchez not getting a vote for National League Cy Young, in first place at least. And then we, in the second segment, talked about, is Rob Thompson undervalued because he came in third in the National League Manager of the Year voting? We complained about the Kyle Schwarber finish. Now let's talk about Trea Turner, because it was very surprising to me that he came in 5th in the National League MVP voting. Now, again, you might say, Connor, you just spent a whole segment of this podcast complaining about how one or two people can change narratives and how that's ridiculous. And now you're talking about a guy who got 1 third place vote, and you're saying, oh, well, change the narrative on Trea Turner. I understand. But there's a reason why he got that vote, I suppose. And he led the National League in batting average this year. And now, according to what the history books will tell you, the only players that had better seasons than Trea Turner in the National League were, or I should say more valuable seasons, were Shohei Ohtani, who finished first, Kyle Schwarber, his teammate, who finished second, Juan Soto, who finished third, Geraldo Perdomo, who finished fourth. 5th, right behind those 4 guys, 2 all-time superstars in Soto and Ohtani, the best power hitter in the National League this past year in Kyle Schwarber, easily, Geraldo Perdomo, who had a ridiculous year out in Arizona. If you didn't see it, you look at some of his numbers. And then Trea Turner. And he gets very little love in this city. And part of that is because first impressions, you can't take them back. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. It's an old saying that very much holds true, especially in Philadelphia sports. We are a very, very tough place to win over if you do not start out on the right foot. And Trea Turner started his Phillies career with the worst season of his professional career. And from that moment, there was a portion of the fan base that was out on him. And then with the standing ovation that was given to him in that 2023 season, a beautiful moment for Philadelphia Phillies fans to stand up and support their guy who's going to be here for such a long time. I think there's also a portion of the fan base that thought that was soft and very anti-Philadelphia and mockingly talk about the standing ovation now. And I think it almost made Trea Turner more of a lightning rod that we gave him that standing ovation in the first place. Because now it feels like he's the participation trophy winner and he better repay us for doing something so out of character. And now the bar is raised so high for Trea Turner, it's almost impossible to meet. There have been people talking about, could you trade Trea Turner this offseason? If you could, would you? Would you eat some of the contract? Would you rather have someone else playing shortstop? All of these things. For a guy who finished 5th in the National League MVP voting, how many times in the history of baseball do you think you could go back and find a top 5 MVP finisher where there was a good portion of the fan base that said, if we could trade that guy, we would? Or if we could, we'll say, get rid of that guy, we would. Because, yeah, sometimes you want to trade high on an aging player, right? So I'm sure that's happened before. But it's just very strange that a guy that can put together that type of a season is perceived the way that he is in Philadelphia. Now, I already brought up the factor of his first season here. But another factor is the lack of postseason success. He came in here with a bit of a knock from Dodgers fans who were saying, yeah, he's not really a clutch player. He's not going to show up for you in the big moments, at least in our experience. And whenever you get a new player who you're excited about, who your team just signed to a mega contract, you always think that that's sour grapes from a previous fan base. Dodgers fans are just being salty. Trey didn't re-sign with them, so they're going to talk trash on him because he's not their guy anymore. I get it, but you're just talking just to talk. He's going to show up for us. Look how talented he is. Look at his numbers. He's got good years ahead of him. That was my thought process, at least, when I first heard those things from Dodgers fans. And now, when you look at what he did in 23 and 24, and this past year in the 2025 postseason, it's hard to argue that Trea Turner is a postseason underachiever. And maybe he's the perfect embodiment of what this team is right now. We talked about it yesterday where the Phillies always the bridesmaid, never the bride, right? Seems to be the theme of the 2025 Philadelphia Phillies. But Trea Turner's kind of one of those guys where it's just regular season, pencil him in for strong performance. It's going to happen. He'll have some mistakes that'll kill you every once in a while. Or not kill you, but that'll drive you insane. And at the end of the day, he's going to hit and he's going to field and he's going to show off a little bit of pop and he's going to be a productive player for you. And there's a lot of teams that would probably want regular season Trea Turner. And then the postseason just absolutely gone. The switch flips off somehow. I don't know if he's not ready for the moment mentally. I don't know if he gets approached differently in the postseason. It doesn't seem like it. The Phillies have a very standard approach that teams use against them because throwing outside the zone to the big boppers and making the lesser players in the lineup try and kill you is not rocket science, but it's very Jekyll and Hyde with Trea Turner. It's very Jekyll and Hyde with the Philadelphia Phillies right now. In the regular season, they go win 96 games in a division. In the postseason, they look like they've never hit a baseball before. So is he undervalued? I think the answer here is a definitive yes, because anybody that can put together a top 5 finish MVP season who is treated as just another guy, that's undervaluing. Now, do I think Trea Turner is worth the contract that he's on right now? You could get into a debate about that. I lean towards no, only because he doesn't feel like he's elevating the team enough. You know those moments. That's just kind of a gut feeling type of deal. That you're not going to find that on Baseball Reference. You're not going to find that on the scoreboard at Citizens Bank Park. That's just kind of it's the Bobby Abreu stat, right? Where people will tell you Bobby Abreu hit hundreds of home runs in his career, and none of them ever mattered. They were always when the Phillies were like down 5 or up 5, which isn't true, but he just felt like a non-impactful in big moments player. That's kind of what Trea Turner feels like. So do we naturally undervalue him because of that? Yeah, we do. Bobby Abreu is a fringe Hall of Famer. There are people in Philadelphia that will tell you he's a bum. Trea Turner is probably going to have that at some point when he retires and he begins to get the opportunity to go for Hall of Fame status. And that's the interesting thing about this is his numbers are undeniably high level. But the view of him in Philadelphia does not reflect his performance. Is that wrong of us? Or are we seeing what's really important? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as to whether or not we're evaluating Trea Turner fairly. I think we undervalue him, but maybe the weighting of the playoff failures or shortcomings, I should say, are more important than the weighting of the regular season success. Still, nonetheless, congrats to Trea on finishing top 5 in MVP voting. It's a heck of an accomplishment. Having 2 guys in the top 5, a runner-up to the Cy Young finish, a third place manager of the year finish. And by the way, none of those guys are Bryce Harper, who was also on the team, and winning 1 postseason game. You can see why Phillies fans are going insane this offseason. But it is what it is. That is what the story of the 2025 Phillies will always be. There's no going back and changing it now. But can you bring guys back to try and change it next year? The Phillies have some big name free agents. And I went to you, the listener or viewer of Locked On Phillies, in our Off the Poll segment. I asked in a Twitter poll, who of the big 4 free agents out there for the Philadelphia Phillies would you most want to see them bring back? Schwarber, Suarez, Bader, Realmuto. Some really interesting stuff in the breakdown of this Twitter poll that I'll read for you coming up next as we continue today's episode. First, before we do that, though, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to Locked On Phillies. You can rate and review if you're listening to us in podcast form. Be part of our Everydayers Club and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free and easy. You get to watch the show. You hit that subscribe button in the corner of your screen, and you'll be able to get notifications when new episodes are posted. It'll show up in your algorithm. You can leave comments on the videos. It's free and easy to do, but it adds another element to following Locked On Phillies, and it also really helps us out. And if you can't watch all the time, you can listen to the podcast. It is a podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, we're available. And I ask that you rate and review if you're listening to us in podcast form. So we've done this segment in the past. If you're not familiar with it, it's normally an off-season thing, but it's called Off the Poll. It's a play on the foul pole in baseball, but I put out a poll question on X, and I get responses. I don't say what my pick would be because I don't want to bias the poll. And then we read the responses, and I tell you my takeaway. So the first off the poll question of the offseason, and these will be done on Fridays. A reminder, Mailbag Monday comes your way again this next week. So I will put out a tweet later on tonight for you to put responses for us to answer on Monday's episode. I say us, me to answer, you to ask, but you understand what I'm saying there. So we'll get in those questions later on tonight. Our off the poll question for today's episode. If the Phillies could only re-sign 1 free agent, who would you want it to be? Kyle Schwarber, Ranger Suarez, Harrison Bader, JT Realmuto. Now, first place is no surprise here. Kyle Schwarber received 59% of the vote. Obviously the favorite for people to bring back. He was runner-up for MVP, if you haven't heard, in the first 24 minutes or so of today's episode. He hit 56 home runs, 132 RBIs. He was a monster. He's a great clubhouse leader. He would be my first pick to bring back. Like, no doubt, not even a second thought, Kyle Schwarber should be your choice. But not everybody feels that way. And the gaps are filled in by folks that would not bring Kyle Schwarber back as their number 1 option. Where do those folks go next? This is where this poll gets interesting. If I had to have guessed, I would have said Ranger Suarez would be the next option. And then maybe even Harrison Bader because of the fire that he brings to his locker room, the switch that it seemed like he helped turn on for this Phillies lineup. But JT Realmuto crushed both of them. He got 26% of the vote. A quarter of our responders, a little over a quarter of our responders, said the number one player they would want the Philadelphia Phillies to re-sign would be JT Realmuto. And to those quarter plus of our responders, I say, you know ball. I think that's some high level thinking. He wouldn't be my first choice, but I respect him being yours because JT Realmuto is one of those players that doesn't just affect himself the way he plays. He is a leader on this team, much like Kyle Schwarber. He is the signal caller for the Philadelphia Phillies defense. He will tell the pitchers what to throw, when to throw it, where to throw it. You've heard multiple high-level pitchers, Ranger, Sanchez, Zach Wheeler, guys that have been in MVP conversations, say, I should not have shook off JT Realmuto there. I did it and I gave up a big hit. That's the last time I'll ever do that. He has that much control over this pitching staff, that much trust in him. And if he was batting 110 and was just absolutely a liability out there at the plate, and he was good defensively, but not great defensively, and the pitching staff was like, yeah, we really like this guy. Hit the bricks, kid. That's not enough. But the fact of the matter is JT Realmuto is still a plus defender at the position. He is a plus option compared to other catchers around baseball offensively, especially when you look at his second half numbers this year. He was really rough in the first half. He was red hot for a lot of the second half of this season. So he can still swing it. He's not going to be the guy he was 3-4 years ago. But you could do so much worse than JT Realmuto at catcher. And he has so much familiarity with the team that's been together for so long. And I know familiarity sounds like a word that could be better interpreted as stagnant for the Philadelphia Phillies. And folks want change so that familiarity, that comfortability that the Phillies might feel in the locker room gets shaken up a little bit because changes need to happen. But JT Realmuto's familiarity is a huge value to this pitching staff and to this team. And that's why I love that he was the second pick for people in this poll, or I guess the second pick in percentage, the first pick for over a quarter of our responders. Third place, 11% of you saying Ranger Suarez. Now, I think the reason that's so low is because people have seen the writing on the wall with Ranger. I've been preaching it. It's been talked about a lot of places. The chances that he comes back are slim and none, and I'm pretty sure Slim just left town. So that may be a more, I know it's not realistic that Ranger comes back, so I'm not going to vote for Ranger, but 11% of our responders did say Ranger Suarez, and only 4% are saying Harrison Bader, which I don't think is a knock on Harrison Bader. But it's a reminder, if you're a fanatical Harrison Bader guy, it's a reminder of who he is. He's not an MVP candidate. He's not going to hit 56 home runs. He's not a guy that's going to make your pitching staff better. He's not a guy that is going to be an end-of-the-year award candidate in any sense, because Ranger Suarez could be in the Cy Young conversation any given time. He puts together a healthy season. You never know. He has that type of ceiling. Harrison Bader's ceiling is an all-star player, not an all-world player. Speaking of all-world players, by the way, we will break down all MLB team selections on Monday, and I'll be a little bit more annoyed at that as well. So Monday is going to be mailbag, the all MLB team, and then just a little bit more of a celebration of the guys finishing where they did in year-end voting, because it's been a lot of complaining from me this week. But Harrison Bader, only 4%. It kind of shows me what I already knew, is that he's a guy. He's a good dude to have on your team. I'd like to have him back. I love what he brought to the Phillies this year, but you can find another Harrison Bader. He is a replaceable player, at least in theory. I don't know what theory has Kyle Schwarber as replaceable. I don't know what theory has JT Realmuto as replaceable. And, well, that's why they're our top 2 vote getters on today's poll. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you again so much for joining us. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number 1 sports podcast network. Very special to be able to say that. You guys all have a good weekend. We'll be back at it on Monday. Enjoy some Eagles football on Sunday, Sixers, Flyers. Shout out to the other Philadelphia sports teams. And I'll talk to you on our next episode on Locked On Phillies.